Okay, so we'll try to see how much we can get done. Well, the next topic that we have is very interesting. It's the size of the tefillin. Okay, so let's start off with the tour, and then we'll go back to some of the earlier sources. The tour says, "Ve'ein shiur meforash b'Talmud le'orach ve'rochav ribua batim." It doesn't say anywhere in the Talmud a precise shiur for how big the batim of the tefillin need to be. We said they should be a square, but it didn't say the measurements, any minimal or maximal measurements. אלא שבשימוש הרבה כתב שצריך שיהיו 4 בתים אצבעיים על אצבעיים. Okay, שימוש הרבה is interesting. It's something that appears, you know, the Rosh on Masechet Menachot has the Hilchot Tefillin, and then after his Hilchot Tefillin, towards the end, he quotes something from the Geonim called Shimush Rabba. Let me show you just how it looks here in the not really looks, but I quoted a little bit of the source pages of this Shimush Rabba. Here we go. Okay, he says in הלכות קטנות הראש, he says נשלמו הלכות תפילין הנמצאים במשנה בגמרא, ולכתוב הלכות תפילין הנמצאים על שם הגאון, וזה ז"ל ונקרא שימוש הרבה. In other words, the work from the times of the Geonim, all kinds of theories on who wrote it, but I don't think there's any clear evidence. Anyway, the Shimush Rabba is a questionable work. Why? Because the Rishonim found a lot of problems with it, and they took issues with a lot of things that it says in the Shimush Rabba. But the Shimush Rabba, he seems to quote something which appears from the Gemara, and he says, Amar Rava, Hayman debai leme'eved tefillin maiti a'atuva, trein etzbei al trein etzbei, ke'ein trein etzbei. In other words, that he says it should be 2 etzbaot by 2 etzbaot, like a 2 by 2, the size of the tefillin. But he says, V'yavu tfei shapir dami, v'yavei batzir lo pasul. So even he admits that it's not accurate, this size. It can be more or less. Now, just to explain 2 etzbaot, how much is that? According to Reb Chaim Naeh, 2 etzbaot, I'm sorry, 1 etzba is 20 millimeters, so 2 etzbaot is 40 millimeters. And according to the Chazon Ish, the width of an etzba is 24 millimeters, so 2 etzbaot are 48 millimeters. Okay, but that's the size that appears in Shimush Rabba. Okay, the Rosh argues, he says there cannot be such a statement in the Gemara. However, let me just go back to the tour. Just finish reading it in the tour. And then taken from. He says, אלא בשימוש הרבה כתב שצריך שיהיו 4 בתים אצבעיים על אצבעיים, 2 אצבעות by 2 אצבעות. Again, somewhere between 40 to 48 millimeters. ולא נהגו כן, אלא עושים אורך ורוחב הבתים ולא שיעור וגם גובהן. לחוקק בדפוס 3 חריצים. Okay, that's how to, let's just finish reading it. So he says rather we do Orach ve'rochav v'batim below shiur. We don't have a specific shiur that we're makpid on, and also their height. וחוקק בדפוס 3 חריצים עומקם כדי רוחב הפרשיות, כדי שיגיע חריץ שמן בית לבית למקום התפר, ולוקח אור דק מבהמה או חיה טהורה, ומרככו מרטיבו במים ונותנו על הדפוס ומחניכו ברצין עד שיתקשה ויתייבש ויתקשה. So use that mold to mold the leather in the shape of the tefillin shel Rosh. Okay, now actually Tosfot tried to find anyway an interesting source for this Shimush Rabba, that the tefillin should be 2 etzbaot by 2 etzbaot. And the source of Tosfot for this, it's a bit complicated and it's not very convincing, but the source is that the Gemara Masechet Eruvin, according to one opinion in the Mishnah there, if you find tefillin, you can save them. You can't, again, you're in a place with, you're trying to save them from fire or whatever it is, or, you know, for just being abandoned. So you're allowed to wear 2 pairs of tefillin at a time. So the Gemara asks, why dafka 2? So the Gemara says that Chachamim permitted derech malbush, that you can save them as a form of wearing them. And the Gemara there says, Makom yesh barosh sheraui lanuach bo shtei tefillin. And also regarding the tefillin shel yad as well, Makom yesh bayad sheraui lanuach bo shtei tefillin. Okay, very famous Gemara that there's enough room on the head to put on 2 tefillin. Okay, so here Tosfot asks, מסופק הירי איזה שיעור יש ברוחב התפילין? You know, what's the shiur for tefillin? How could the Gemara come to the conclusion that you have room for 2 tefillin? ויש עושים גדולים מחבריהם, ויש עושים אותם קטנים ביותר, some make it very big, some make it very small. מדקאמר, מקום יש בראש להניח בתפילין, משמע דשיעור רוחבו, שיתמלא מקום השניים. So first assumption of Tosfot is that if the Gemara says that there is room for two, so the room for two fills up the entire space. ואומרי, דמצא במדרש דשיעורן כבית אצבעות, it could be the midrash he's referring to, the שימוש הרבה, ושמח לדבר דציץ רוחבו בית אצבעות. כדאמר בפרק כמה דסוכה, ואומרים בפרק כמה דערכין, שערו היה נראה בין ציץ למצנפת, ששם הניח תפילין, ודומה דציץ היה במקום הראוי להניח תפילין. אף אגב, לגבי ציץ כתיב מצחו, מתרגמין עד בין עינוי, לגבי תפילין נמי כתיב בין עיניכם, ודרשינן בגובה שבראש. Okay, so it's a very complicated proof. In other words, what he's saying is, we find that the tzitz was 2 etzbaot width, and the tzitz, Tosfot is assuming, was placed in where the tefillin are placed, and the Kohen Gadol had a space in between the tzitz and the mitznefet. The mitznefet is sort of the hat that's generally worn by the Kohanim, where he would put on tefillin. So he's saying if the tzitz took up 2 etzbaot, then likely also the tefillin shel rosh took 2 etzbaot. Why? What's the connection? Maybe there's Tosfot is assuming that it was some sort of symmetrical in some sort of fashion. So therefore, if the tzitz is 2 etzbaot width, then the tefillin must be 2 etzbaot width, and if it's 2 etzbaot width, then it also has to be the length because it has to be a proper square. From so that also tries to prove that the tefillin need to be 2 by 2. Okay, it's not a very strong proof. The Rosh, in his, he has, after he quotes the Shimush Rabbah, he has Kitzur Tikun Tefillin V'Ktivatan, where he sort of says just the order of how to make it, and there he discusses the Shiur, and he brings there this proof of Tosfot, but he wants to prove from something else from the Gemara, not that the tefillin need to be 2 by 2, but rather he wants to prove that there is a minimal size from the tefillin. Okay, and he says here, Mikol alein yesh ledakdek דשיעור רוחב תפילין הווה לכל הפחות יותר רחב מאצבע. שאם לא היו רחבים אל האצבע, אם כן יש מקום בראש להניח ג' תפילין. כי הציץ היה רחב בית אצבעות, ומונח במקום תפילין, ועוד נשאר מקום לתפילין. ואם כן, למה שנינו שמכניסם זוג זוג ולא 3 3? In other words, he wants to prove that the tefillin have to be at the very least an etzba. Why? Because if they could be less than an etzba, then you would actually have room on to put on 3 tefillin. Okay? So therefore, he wants to prove from the Gemara that the Gemara said you only have room for 2 tefillin, not for 3 tefillin, but there is a minimal size to the tefillin, and therefore the tefillin need to be at least more than an etzba. Okay? Again, you could argue with this proof that if you have such a small tefillin, you could put on 3 pairs. The reason the Gemara didn't suggest that is because it's just not shachiach to have tefillin that are so small, because it's very difficult to make tefillin that small. So even this proof of the Rosh is not so mukhrach. He says there at the end, he brings in the Shimush Rabbah about the 2 etzbaot. He says that in the proof of Tosfot, he says, "Va'idna ma she'en osim b'batim rechavim 2 etzbaot, היינו לפי שהטיטורה והמעברת רחבים, ואם היו הבתים רחבים באצבעות מלבד הטיטורה והמעברת, לא היה מקום בראש להניח שם 2 תפילין, אי לכך נהגו לעשות רוחב ואורך הבתים בלא שיעור וגם גובהן." In other words, what the Rosh ultimately says is the reason we don't follow the Shimush Rabbah is because, again, according to the Shimush Rabbah, when we say the 2 etzbaot, it needs to be just the bite of the tefillin. Okay? But below that, we have the titura plus the ma'abarta, which the way we do them that they go beyond the batim, right? They're wider than the batim. So if the tefillin will be 2 etzbaot, if just the bite will be 2 etzbaot, and then we'll add on top of that the width of the titura of the ma'abarta, then the tefillin will be too big. We won't be able to put on 2 pairs of tefillin on the rosh. So, like in the Gemara seems to indicate that you should be able to. So therefore, we make it smaller. So the Maisa, it seems from the conclusion of the Rosh, is that the bite should not be less than an etzba, but beyond that, there's no shiur, and we don't need to be makpid on these 2 etzbot. See what happens in the Shulchan Aruch. So the Mechaber rules very simply. He says, Orach verochav habatim vegovhan ein lo shiur. So he rules no shiur, and he doesn't even say the minimal shiur of the Rosh. He just says, simply no mention in the Gemara of any shiur, so that's it. He rules that there's no shiur. And here the Mishnah Berurah says, ומכל מקום נכון נחוש לדברי הגאונים, שסוברים שלכתחילה לא יעשה אותם קטנים מאצבעיים על אצבעיים, והיינו עם הטיטורה. Okay, how did the Mishnah Berurah come to this? So it's not so clear to me, but I think the way the Mishnah Berurah learned is as follows. Again, the proof that was brought that the tefillin need to be etzbaim al etzbaim is again from the Gemara in Masechet Eruvin about that there's space to put on the 2 pairs of tefillin on the rosh, and it was calculated that for that to happen, you would need the tefillin size to be 2 by 2. Now, granted, in the Shimush Rabbah, it said that it was the batim that need to be etzbaim al etzbaim. But then the rosh said we can't do that because we have the titura, which makes it longer, so we have to make the batim smaller. So says the Mishnah Berurah, okay, so let's do the etzbaim al etzbaim with the titura. That will be the proper shiur, and in that way we'll be able to fit in 2 pairs of tefillin on the rosh, not more, not less. Okay, so I think he sort of, because again, from the Shimush Rabbah, it seems quite clear that it's the bite. Again, if I'll just go back to the language of the Shimush Rabbah, it seems quite clear that it's the bite, because he says, in other words, here he's talking about the bite of the tefillin, to mold it, and you see it also from the continuation. So, but we're sort of, because we have the titur and the mabarta, which extend beyond that, then that's why we sort of shift the shiur of the 2 etzbaim to the titur and the mabarta. Okay. He says, "Vayen יר שכתב דאם אין מחזיק עם הטיטור רק אצבע על אצבע, אפילו בדיעבד פסול, וכן פסח בספר ביאורי מרדכי, ואין בספר אליהו רבה שלימד עליהם זכות, מכל מקום סיים דכל בעל נפש ייזהר לעשות את טיטור הרחב בית אצבעיים. ולבד כל אלו מצוי מאוד באלו התפילים הקטנים שפרשיותיהם גרועות עד מאוד מצד דחק המקום, כאשר בעיניי ראיתי הרבה מהם, על כן השומר נפשו ישמור מהם." So he says, you should be makpid on the minimal shiur of the rosh, that it should be more than an etzba and an etzba. And he says, even if there's a limud zchut to say that even that minimal shiur is not me'akiv, nevertheless, you have other problems with the smaller tefillin, because the parshiyot are usually very bad. There are other problems, so therefore he says you should avoid those very tiny tefillin. Okay, also here in the Biur Halacha, he brings all of this, and he says, he brings here the proof of the rosh that, if they would have had such small tefillin, then they would have been able to put in 3 pairs. And he brings the rejection. He says, היו תפילין ומוצאים כאצבעיים ויותר, מה שאין כן בזה, אבל אם כן אף תראה את הראש שם. השולחן ערוך דפסק דלא, כי הראש לא נזכר באחרונים שיהיה מחמד זקים מטעם אחר. ונכון לאדם שיהיו תפילין תמיד ממועצים, דהיינו לא פחות משיעור אצבעיים על אצבעיים, ולא יותר מדלת על דלת אצבעות, והיינו אם הטיטור המברתת, בזה יצא על כל פנים מדין ידי הכל. So למעשה he says it's best not to have them too big. Again, it's like, the story of Goldilocks and the 3 bears, not too big and not too small. You have to have it just right. So that's shiur etzbaim al etzbaim with the titura and the mabarta, and not make it bigger than 4 etzbaot, because then some of the tefillin will be beyond the space of where it is. Now, all of this discussion is only about the tefillin shel rosh. By tefillin shel yad, L'chora, nobody had any issue with the size of the tefillin shel yad. Nevertheless, some poskim say the tefillin shel yad, you should make them the same size as the tefillin shel rosh. It's not so clear why. It could be, again, just for symmetrical purposes, that they'll look the same. But again, also by the tefillin shel yad, we don't want to make it too big, because then also it won't fit into the space that we need on the lower half of the kibbutz. Okay, so I brought.
So how are Chabad tefillin kosher then?
So let's see what Chabad. Well, we can maybe attack Chabad now. Why should we always be on the defensive?
No. I actually asked once a Chabadnik, like, how could it be that the tefillin can be so big, the daf made so big, and just like the Rebbe said, and that's it. That was basically the answer. That like it's written in the Shulchan Aruch Harav, but it couldn't even tell me exactly where.
I didn't
Or
check
did
the
want
Shulchan Aruch Harav here, but generally Chabad, they follow the Shimush Rabbah. Here, I'll show you. I brought here a book from the book of Stam Lemaaseh, and here they show all the opinions. So the standard is to make the tefillin together with the titura 50 millimeters. Okay, you can see it here. In this picture, they have a nice digital ruler. Okay, so that's sort of following the Mishnah Berurah, because let's say, according to the Chazon Ish, if you want to be machmir for the Chazon Ish, so then with the 2 etzbaot is 48 millimeters. So, and the Mishnah Berurah said to do it with the titura. So this is sort of the standard, I think. This is what they wrote here. I didn't check my own that I could measure. It seems to be correct. That together the tefillin with the titura on the bottom, it's 50 millimeters. Okay, so that's a little bit more than 2 etzbaot with the titura, like the Mishnah Berurah said. That's the simplest way to do it. Then you have
actually, I'm happy to have them at about 20 millimeters.
I'm sorry?
We are actually happy to have them small, to have them at like 20 millimeters.
Oh, you have the very small tefillin. Yeah, that's another. Wait, the next thing he says is to make the sheliad a little bit smaller, the titura 42 millimeters. Okay, I guess the advantage of that is by the sheliad we don't have this. It's still 2 etzbaot according to the Reb Chaim, and also by the sheliad there's no real source that we need to have it 2 etzbaot, and we do want to make it smaller so that it will fit in the space. Then the very small tefillin is that the k'tzitza is a little bit more than 20 millimeters, so it's a little bit more than an etzba, right? Like the Rosh was makpid on, and then with the titura and the ma'abauta, it's 39 millimeters. Okay, approximately. That's the picture that he has here. And these are the tefillin, especially for people who want to put on 2 pairs of tefillin at the same time, like those that want to put on tefillin shel Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam at the same time. Like the Mechaber says that you can have one here and one behind it. You've probably seen people do that. So they need these very small tefillin. And then finally is the Chabad. Chabad, they do the bite itself, 40 millimeters, like you see here in this picture. And then with the titura, it obviously comes out to be much more. Okay, I didn't measure exactly. It doesn't have a measure here exactly how much it comes out, but that's the tefillin Chabad. In other words, they follow sort of the Shimush Rabbah, like it's originally that the bite itself is 2 etzbaot, and then that's at least 40 millimeters according to Reb Chaim, and then the tefillin come out to be very big. Again, the problem with that is that it's very hard to put them properly in place when they're that big.
I actually saw that, like especially with the Bachur Bar Mitzvah, like the Sheliad, it's like impossible to put them on properly.
Yeah, he says it here in the book. He goes against it. He says, כמובן כרוך בכך גם חיסרון, כי קשה להדק את ההיטב של ראש באופן שלא יונח הקצה התחתון של הטיטורה למטה במקום שורשי הראש, כפי שדורש לך, וכן בשל יד קשה להיזהר שיונחו באופן של חלקם העליון לא יבלוט למעלה מאמצע העצם, וחלקם התחתון לא יבלוט למטה במקום בשר התפוח. לכן ברור שמי שאין מנהג עליו כן, אין לו לנהוג כן. I saw here somewhere that he wrote specifically, just like you said, that by the Ne'arim, it makes it very difficult. Yeah, I don't remember where I saw it. I think somewhere I saw read somebody who said that it causes problems, especially for young, for the bar mitzvah boys. Okay, anyway, I think like the Mishnah Berurah said, it's best to take the middle opinion, not too big, not too small, and then you're good from all directions. All right, stop here. Any other questions, comments?